Someone walks into a store. An employee smiles and says, "Sorry, we're closed." And somehow, the next 5 minutes involves screaming, a manager being summoned over the loudspeaker, threats of a lawsuit, and a phone pointed at a 19-year-old's face. Over a closed store. Not a robbery, not a crisis, a closed store. Here's the thing. That person didn't wake up that morning planning to humiliate themselves on the internet. Something happened in their brain. Something that turned a perfectly ordinary no into a five-alarm psychological emergency. Today, we're going to find out exactly what that something is, because the answer is way more fascinating and way more human than you think. Part 1. The word. No feels like a loss of control. Let's start with something fundamental. Human beings are wired to crave control, not in a villainous way, in a deeply biological way. From an evolutionary standpoint, feeling in control of your environment meant you were safe. Feeling out of control meant danger. That instinct never left us. So when someone says no to us, it isn't just a word. On some level, it's a disruption, a reminder that the world doesn't orbit around us. For most people, that's a mild annoyance. You take a breath, you move on. But for some people, that disruption hits differently. For them, being told no doesn't feel like inconvenience. It feels like disrespect, like the other person is making a choice to diminish them, like they're being treated as someone who doesn't matter. There's a crucial psychological difference between inconvenience and humiliation. Inconvenience says, "This situation is annoying." Humiliation says, "I am less than." Most of us live in inconvenience territory. Some people skip straight to humiliation. And here's where it gets really interesting. Public rejection hits harder than private rejection. If an employee tells you no when you're alone in an aisle, it stings slightly. But if they say it at the register with three people behind you in line, watching, that stings on a completely different level. Now, it isn't just about the coupon. Picture it. Someone presents a coupon at checkout. The cashier politely explains that it expired 3 weeks ago. That's it. That's the whole situation. But the customer's face changes, their voice rises. "That's ridiculous. I've been coming here for years. This is how you treat loyal customers?" The cashier didn't steal anything, didn't insult anyone. They just enforced a deadline. But in that person's mind, the coupon became a test, and the store failed it. The no became proof that they aren't valued, that they don't have the power they thought they had. And if control is your psychological foundation, losing it, even symbolically, can feel like the floor dropping out. But that's only part of the story, because control alone doesn't explain the scale of the reaction. For that, we have to talk about something that runs even deeper. Part 2. Entitlement turns rules into personal insults. Entitlement is one of those words that gets thrown around so much it loses its meaning. So let's be precise about what it actually does to the human brain. Entitlement isn't about being rude, it's a belief system. A quiet, often unconscious assumption that you deserve special treatment, and that the normal rules that govern other people don't apply to you. When that belief is active, rules stop being neutral policies. They become insults. Think about what it means to genuinely believe you are someone who deserves exceptions. Now imagine you're told, "No, the rules apply to you too." Suddenly that isn't a policy. It's a judgment. It's someone looking at you and saying, "You are ordinary. You are not special. You are exactly the same as everyone else." For an entitled person, that can feel devastating. This is why you get the "I've been shopping here for years" speech. Someone wants to return a jacket 6 months outside the return window. The manager explains the policy clearly. And the customer, instead of accepting this, pivots. "I spend thousands of dollars here every year. I've been coming here since before you were working here. I've recommended this store to everyone I know." None of that is relevant to the return policy. They know that. But they're not making a legal argument. They're making a social argument. They're saying, "I am not a random person off the street. I am important. I have status here. And important people get exceptions." The customer is always right culture accidentally supercharged this thinking. It was never meant to mean the customer is literally always factually correct. It was a service philosophy. But some people took it as a personal charter, a divine right to never be told no. Service workers became servants. Policies became optional. And any pushback became betrayal. Here's the uncomfortable part. Entitlement often has a protective function. It's shielding something underneath it. And what it's shielding is something we don't talk about nearly enough. Part 3. The meltdown is often about status. Let's reframe the whole thing for a second. What if the fight about the coupon, the return policy, the parking spot, the mask, the queue, what if none of those are actually what the fight is about? What if the fight is about status? Status anxiety is one of the most powerful and least discussed forces in human behavior. We are intensely social creatures. We track where we stand in relation to others, almost constantly, often without realizing it. And when we feel that our status has been lowered, when we feel looked down on, dismissed, disrespected, we react. Sometimes with sadness, sometimes with withdrawal, and sometimes with rage. The manager request is the clearest example of this. On the surface, asking for a manager seems like an escalation tactic. And it is. But it's also something else. It's a search for someone who will restore the status quo. The employee said no. The employee is low on the hierarchy. So the logic becomes, I need to find someone higher. Someone who will recognize my importance and fix the situation. Someone who will put things back in the right order, which is me, on top. Do you know who I am? Is the most naked version of this. It's a status signal. It's an attempt to reframe the interaction. This isn't two equal people in a disagreement. I am above you, treat me accordingly. And there's a layer here that requires real care to talk about, but it matters. Being corrected or denied by someone younger or someone they perceive as lower status can trigger a disproportionate reaction in some people. It doesn't make that reaction justified. It just helps explain why the same no from a store manager versus a teenage cashier can produce wildly different results. Here's a scene that probably feels familiar. Someone parks in a restricted zone. A young employee politely points at the sign. The person wasn't expecting to be corrected. By this person. In public. The embarrassment arrives before the anger does. And then, embarrassment becomes something else entirely. Part 4. Anger covers shame. Here's a psychological truth that explains so much human behavior. Shame and anger live on the same circuit. When someone feels exposed, caught doing something wrong, corrected in public, proven to be mistaken, shame arrives first. It's fast, hot, and unbearable. And the brain has a very reliable escape hatch from shame. Anger. Anger externalizes. Instead of I was wrong, it becomes they wronged me. Instead of I'm embarrassed, it becomes they're attacking me. It's not a conscious choice. It happens in a fraction of a second. But it's a psychological defense mechanism that works, at least temporarily. This is why doubling down feels so natural. Admitting you're right, I was wrong requires tolerating shame. But if you escalate, if you get louder, if you demand the manager, you've temporarily escaped the shame spiral. You're back in control of the narrative. The problem is the meltdown is now public, and here's where it gets genuinely fascinating. Once an audience forms, other customers watching, employees recording, phones coming out, the stakes change completely. The person no longer needs to win the argument. They need to win in front of witnesses. Because they chose a role when they walked into this confrontation, they're the wronged customer, the person being treated unfairly. And now they have to stay in that role or admit, in front of everyone, that they were never wronged at all. The meltdown often continues well past the point of any logical return because the person is no longer fighting about the original issue. They're fighting to keep their story alive, and who's watching matters enormously. Part 5. Public attention makes the behavior worse. Social psychology has a concept called the spotlight effect. People tend to overestimate how much others are noticing them. In an ordinary meltdown scenario, the spotlight effect gets flipped. The person wants to be noticed. The audience isn't something to escape. It's something to perform for. Once people start watching, behavior escalates. Voices get louder, claims get bigger. The injury gets more dramatic because the audience becomes a kind of validation machine. If enough people are watching, and if the person can frame themselves as the victim convincingly enough, maybe the crowd will take their side. Maybe the employee will fold. Maybe the situation will resolve in their favor because they performed outrage loudly enough. And then the phones come out. This changes everything. A phone camera is not neutral. To someone already in a heightened emotional state, a camera can feel like a weapon. Or, more interestingly, it can become a stage. Some people escalate harder when filmed because they believe the camera will capture their injustice. They're performing for a future audience, one they imagine will watch the video and say, yes, you were wronged. You were right to react this way. The tragedy, and it's genuinely a little tragic, is that the video almost always tells the opposite story. But by then, the person is too far in. They chose the role of the wronged victim. Now they have to ride it to the end, especially when it obviously isn't working. Which brings us to a mindset that makes all of this make a dark kind of sense. Part 6. The victim mindset. I'm being attacked. Victimhood is comfortable, not in a cynical way, in a deeply psychological way. When you are the victim, you are automatically morally justified. You didn't cause the problem. You're reacting to it. You can't be held accountable for your behavior because look what they did to you. This is what psychologists call externalizing blame. and it's one of the most powerful cognitive shortcuts the human brain has. For someone already primed to see the world this way, being asked to follow a parking rule isn't a parking rule. It's targeting. Being told a restaurant is fully booked isn't a full restaurant. It's exclusion. Being asked to leave after yelling isn't a consequence. It's persecution. The policy is neutral. The victim mindset makes it personal. And here's the thing that's easy to miss. The person often genuinely feels wronged. This isn't always calculated manipulation. Some people's inner experience is so thoroughly victim-oriented that normal accountability genuinely feels like an attack. They aren't faking the outrage. They're feeling it because their brain has interpreted an ordinary no as an assault on their rights, their dignity, and their identity. Which means the fight isn't really about the parking spot. The fight is about who they are. Part 7. Identity Fusion. This is who I am. Here's the concept that ties everything together. Identity fusion is what happens when a person's sense of self becomes tangled up with a particular role or status. I am a loyal customer. I am a taxpayer. I am a homeowner. I am a parent. I am someone who knows my rights. These are identities. And identities aren't just descriptions. They're self-worth containers. Attack the identity and you're attacking the person. When someone is told they can't cut the line and responds with, I've lived in this neighborhood for 30 years, man, that's not a non sequitur. That's identity deployment. They're pulling out a credential that should, in their mind, establish who they are and why the normal rules shouldn't apply. It'd almost be funny if it weren't so human. I pay taxes here, as if municipal tax contributions unlock a personal fast pass. I've spent a lot of money at this store, as if loyalty points come with an exception clause for behavior. These aren't logical arguments. They're identity arguments. The person is saying, don't you know who I am in this story? And when the answer is essentially no, the rule applies to everyone, that's not just a policy enforcement. That's an identity rejection. And some people simply cannot process that. Not because they're monsters, but because their emotional wiring doesn't have a graceful response to it. Part 8. Emotional regulation failure. Let's talk about what's happening under the hood. Emotional regulation is the ability to experience a difficult feeling without immediately acting on it. To feel frustrated and pause, to feel embarrassed and not lash out, to feel angry and choose how to respond. It's a skill, and not everyone has it developed equally. Some people have what psychologists call low frustration tolerance. When discomfort arrives, it doesn't sit politely and wait. It floods. The technical term is emotional flooding, when the emotional brain essentially overwhelms the rational brain. You stop thinking clearly. You stop weighing consequences. You stop caring how you look. You just react. This is what an adult tantrum actually is. Not immaturity in a simple sense, but a failure of the emotional system to catch and hold the feeling before it erupts outward. And here's the detail that's wildly counterintuitive. A calm employee makes it worse. When someone is flooded and escalating, and the employee responds with steady, polite neutrality, many people escalate harder. Because calmness reads as indifference. It reads as superiority. You're so calm because you don't take me seriously. You're calm because you don't think I matter. The calm becomes an insult, and the person keeps escalating, trying to get a rise, trying to make the situation match how enormous it feels inside them. But underneath all of this, there's something even more primitive happening, something that the meltdown is really trying to achieve. Part 9. Power. The hidden drug behind the meltdown. Let's say the quiet part loud. The meltdown is often a power grab. Service workers operate in a structurally strange position. They're supposed to help you, accommodate you, smile at you, but they can't always give you what you want. That gap between the expectation of service and the limit of what's possible is where entitlement explodes. Because some people don't just want the refund, they don't just want the exception, the table, the upgraded seat, the free item. They want submission. They want the other person to bend, to capitulate, to demonstrate through their actions that yes, you are important, and yes, I will do whatever it takes to make you happy. I'll get you fired. That phrase is a psychological weapon. It's not just a threat, it's a dominance maneuver. It says, I have power over your entire life. I can reach into your livelihood with my complaint. Do you want to test me? Demanding the manager serves the same function. I need someone with real authority is code for I need someone who will submit to me because you won't. And when submission doesn't come, when the employee stays calm, the manager backs the employee, and the policy holds firm, the meltdown goes supernova. Because the dominance bid has failed publicly. And that brings us to the biggest insight of this entire video. Part 10. Why no breaks the fantasy. Some people carry around a private internal story about who they are and how the world responds to them. In that story, they matter. They're respected. When they walk into a room, people accommodate them. When they speak, people listen. When they have a problem, people fix it. Quickly, cheerfully, without question. It's a fantasy of specialness. And for a while, the world cooperates. Friends defer to them. Family avoids conflict with them. Certain relationships get built around their comfort. The fantasy gets reinforced day after day. And then they walk into a situation where the world doesn't cooperate. A closed store. A neutral employee. A policy that exists whether they like it or not. A cameraless moment where no one cares about their internal story. Reality doesn't match the fantasy, and some people, instead of adjusting the fantasy, try to force reality to comply. Get louder, make threats, demand escalation, create a scene. Make the discomfort so unbearable for everyone else that someone eventually will give in just to make it stop. This is why some entitled behavior works, by the way, because sometimes giving in is easier, and that teaches the person that the meltdown is a valid strategy until they hit a system that won't bend, an employee who has been trained not to engage, a policy that's non-negotiable, a bystander who starts filming, and then the mismatch between self-image and reality becomes impossible to ignore. The meltdown isn't about the parking spot. The meltdown is about the collision between who someone believes they are and who the world is treating them as. That collision is painful, and pain, when it has no healthy outlet, comes out as spectacle. Part 11. Why we can't stop watching Karen videos. Here's a question worth sitting with. Why do these videos go viral? It's not just cruelty, it's not just comedy. Something much more psychologically interesting is happening when these clips spread across the internet at the speed of shared outrage. First, moral drama. Every Karen video is a tiny morality play. There are rules. Someone is breaking them, someone else is enforcing them. The audience watches to see who will prevail. Second, social norm enforcement. Humans are deeply invested in social rules. When we watch someone violate a norm, cutting a line, screaming at a cashier, demanding special treatment, our brains activate almost as if we ourselves are threatened. The meltdown is a disruption of the social order. And watching it get handled, the manager showing up, the police being called, the crowd turning on the person, gives us a vicarious sense of restoration. The rules held. The system worked. Good. Third, schadenfreude. There's an honest pleasure in watching entitlement crash into consequences. It's not the nicest instinct, but it's a very real one. And fourth, maybe most importantly, the will they get away with it? Tension. Every Karen video has narrative stakes. Will the employee fold? Will the manager cave? Will the crowd side with the screaming person or the exhausted cashier? You keep watching because you genuinely don't know how it ends. It's a courtroom drama that happens in a Costco parking lot, and we all feel very strongly about the verdict. Part 12. What Karen behavior reveals about modern society. Zoom out for a second. We live in a culture that has spent decades telling people they are special, that they deserve the best, that they should never have to wait, that their satisfaction is the highest possible priority. Customer service culture industrialized the idea that the customer's comfort was sacred. Social media gave everyone a platform and an audience. Smartphones made it possible to document any injustice or manufacture one. And then we added loneliness, frustration, the quiet, grinding feeling of being a small person in a very large and indifferent world. The sense that nobody listens, that your complaints go nowhere, that the big systems don't care about you. For most people, that frustration has no outlet. For some people, it finds one. A service worker who has to stay calm, a cashier who can't leave, a situation where they finally feel like they have some leverage. The Karen meltdown is not just about one entitled person and one broken interaction. It's a symptom of something bigger, a culture that promised everyone specialness and delivered disappointment. People who feel powerless in their actual lives, at work, at home, in a world that doesn't recognize their importance. Finding a space where they can, for a moment, feel powerful. That doesn't make it okay, but it makes it human. And recognizing the human part, the shame, the status anxiety, the fractured self-image, the failed emotional regulation, might be the only way to actually understand it. Here's the final thought. Nobody likes being told no. That's not a Karen thing. That's a human thing. We all want exceptions sometimes. We all want to feel special. We all feel a sting when we don't get what we want. The difference is what happens next. For most of us, a no is just a speed bump. Annoying, maybe disappointing, quickly forgotten. But for some people, no lands like a verdict, like the world has just looked at them, weighed them, and found them ordinary. Like their status, their identity, their entire sense of self has been challenged by a coupon expiration date. And so they fight, loudly, publicly, often on camera, not for the refund, not for the table, not for the parking spot, for the version of themselves that is too important to be told no. That's not a personality type. That's a wound that happens to be very, very loud. Now, drop it in the comments. What's the wildest public meltdown you've ever witnessed in person? Customer service veterans, this is your moment. Let's hear it.